Namaste friends. Over a period of time, I have had the chance to proactively interact with quite a few Jyotish students making a move from the Parashari system to the Krishnamurti Paddhati. Most of them have had 2+ years of hands-on experience in the Parashari system. This is the right kind of experience for start delving into the KP framework. But during my casual interaction, I noticed that such newcomers to KP tend to get confused at the very beginning stages of learning the Krishnamurti Paddhati, despite they already have a reasonably good experience in the Parashari Jyotish. It seems to me that these students have not been emphatically told about what I call as three essential tips or the rules or the pointers or the guidelines while transitioning from the Parashari to the KP framework. And that is what I'm going to share in this video. The very first rule that you can see is the intentional unlearning of the Parashari or the traditional rules. The initial months of learning KP could cause confusion because on one hand the Parashari experience is required, and I do believe the Parashari experience is required before you start learning KP, and this experience in Parashari is going to be very helpful. And on the other hand, the unlearning is also expected. So that's the rule number one, the intentional unlearning of the Parashari or the traditional rules. But the KP framework requires some unlearning. Thus, it is essential in the beginning to break out of the Parashari overload. It's going to help. Recently, I gave a list of what need to be deliberately unlearned of the Parashari system, and I'm going to share that list with you. This list contains some of the essential elements of the Parashari system that one might have to actually unlearn. And some of those are, you see, the retrograde planet, the combust or the exalted, debilitated, Ucca Neech, Swarashi, and then even the aspects, the traditional aspects, the Mars 4th and the 8th, or the Jupiter's 5th and the 9th. All this, one has to forget all these things because these things have no place in the Krishnamurti system. So usually when I give this kind of a list, the initial response is not very good, and many of the users, they tend to get quite confused that what is expected of them, why they are expected to ignore all these things of the Parashari system. This alone creates quite a shock and confusion, but this need to be done. All these things from the Parashari system you have to unlearn. But there is more to it. This list will not end here. And some of the additional concepts regarding the interpretation of a horoscope using the Parashari method, like the Shodashvar, the Shadbal, the Bhavabal, Ashtakvar, Avasthas, the planet being in Vriddhavastha or the Yuva Avastha, then some of these concepts that have come from the Gemini astrology, like the Upagraha and the Atmakarak. So all these things need to be ignored. And then, like in the Parashari system, then one need to judge a horoscope from the sun or from the moon or from the other planets. So, and there's a bunch of other Parashari rules. So now what happens is this creates an additional kind of panic, I would say, in the mind of the students. But one has to do it. There is no other way out. In Krishnamurti Paddhati, these things are not considered, and so these concepts should not become a roadblock for you to understand the new concepts that Krishnamurti Paddhati is going to present. So these things need to be ignored. Then additionally, a lot of these the resources or the articles or even the YouTube videos that you consume, and that has to do more with the Parashari astrology. So that also need to be ignored. So I added these to my list. When you read these, like Jupiter transit in Aries or Saturn transit in Aquarius, or the 3-planet conjunction, the YouTube is full of these kind of videos. The Sade Sati, Manglek, eclipse, and then of course the Bhrigu Nandi Nadi and Nakshatra Siddhant. So these things need to be also ignored. You can consume these videos, but they are mostly for the entertainment purpose for the Krishnamurti student. They have not much value in the Krishnamurti system. So what happens is, by the time this list is given, a typical student who has invested a couple of years in the Parashari system gets into some kind of a panic mode. But this is very essential, the first essential rule, that you have to intentionally unlearn the Parashari or the traditional rules. Only then you will be ready to absorb the new rules of the Krishnamurti Paddhati. So I would say the shedding of the old baggage. So that's the first important thing that you have to keep in mind when you're trying to do in the KP system. So old rule, Parashari rules, must be ignored. So that's the first essential guidelines. The intentional unlearning of the Parashari or the traditional rules. You have to travel light when you are getting into the KP learning mode. Now let's move on to the second essential guideline. The second important guideline or the rule is that in Krishnamurti Paddhati, the horoscope analysis is done using what is called as the house grouping. This is the central engine of KP. But before I tell you a little bit more about it, I would once again repeat that all these things from the traditional Parashari Jyotish must be ignored for interpreting the horoscope. The whole concept of house grouping is a very unique and outstanding concept in the Krishnamurti Paddhati, and the interpretation of the a horoscope depends on what I will call as a bhava yoga or house yuti, and the handshaking or the handshaking of the houses or the interlinking of the bhav, those kind of a thing. So in Krishnamurti Paddhati, the whole focus is on how all these the houses come together to create a yoga. I would call it as a bhav yoga. I would call this as a bhav yoga. And let me give you a very easy example of the marriage. So in Krishnamurti Paddhati, the rule is that one bhav alone is not sufficient to bring forth a specific event. You have to have multiple houses coming together. So what's that rule? Let me write that for you. Right. One bhav alone is not sufficient to bring forth a specific event, and the interlinking of multiple houses are required. And let's take this example of the marriage, right? So for marriage in the KP system, the multiple houses are the 2, 7 and the 11. The second house, it indicates the kutum or the addition of a new member. Seventh house is the house of legal bonding, and the 11th is the house of physical affinity. So these houses need to come together, and this is the interlinking of the houses or the bhav yoga or the bhav yuti is caused by something called the significators in KP. This is a very unique concept in KP about the bhav handshaking being enabled by the planet through something called the significator. If you type this word significator in Google, is going to flag a spelling mistake, because this is a very unique word that Krishnamurti coined to kind of announce that the bhav handshaking is enabled by planets through something called the significators. It's not a difficult concept, it's a easy concept, but the point here is that in KP the various aspects of life are all seen from the house grouping, and KP rules are universal, so you will not find much deviation, and all you have to do is to focus on the house grouping rules in the KP. So that's our tip number 2, the house grouping, central engine of the KP. So now let's go to the last, the third tip, the event-centric approach. Now, the many students are already familiar with a typical KP worksheet, and this is just a part of the KP worksheet that I have displayed. And these students, they already know what is meant by a star lord or the sublord. Theoretically, they know it, that what is meant by a star lord, sublord. They also know what significator, what is meant by significators. But recently someone with good handle on the Parashari Jyotish approached me with a question, and these kind of questions are very typical. I keep on getting these questions, and the question was that about the result of the Saturn and the Mercury period. These questions are very common, that what is going to be the result, or how do we read the result for the Saturn Dasha and the Mercury Bhakti within the KP framework. Now, this kind of approach is a source of huge confusion and should be avoided at all cost. If you are learning KP, then you should never be asking this kind of a question, that what is going to be the result for A Dasha or a B Bhakti, just based on these numbers alone. If you just look at these numbers, you are going to surely get lost in the maze of numbers, and many of these students, they get disheartened as they are not able to navigate through these numbers, and all these things become meaningless for them. So that's why you have to have a what is called as a event-centric approach. What is event-centric approach? Event-centric approach is more like a query-based approach, where you break down the journey of the life into small questions, and such as, let me give you a small list over here, right? So ask these kind of questions, that during A Dasha and B Bhakti, what would be the status of money for this person, and for that, then you have to look at the 2, 6 and 11, the combination of 2, 6, 11, the Bhavayuti, or the grouping of houses for 2, 6 and 11. Similarly, another question could be about the marriage or the matrimonial life, right? In that case, you have to then look at these particular house grouping, and the status enhancement, career, and then disease, and there's a whole list of various other questions. But the idea is that you have to break it down into all these questions, and some 8 or 10 questions are very common, depending on the particular age of a person, starting with the education and the subjects, and then the job or the career, or the disease, health, foreign trip, those kind of a thing. But if somebody has any specific question, then you can always find a grouping of the houses according to KP. All these resources are available on the internet, and in some of my videos also, you will also find a list of all these questions. So this is the right way to study a horoscope in KP, the event-centric approach. And this particular traditional way of looking at the Dasha and Bhukti, that you have to kind of unlearn and just focus on the event-centric approach. So this will be very helpful, and this will give you a very good clarity of how to move forward in the Krishnamurti Paddhati. And many of these KP videos I have seen, where there is in the comment section, the people, they leave comments about such as these. Let me give you an example. Right, you might have seen this kind of a comment. That's especially in the videos related to the KP learning, that my Mercury, and then they'll give you some number, Venus, this, please tell about my Mercury Dasha. You should never entertain, and you should also not leave these kind of comment. These kind of a comment and this kind of approach has no value in KP. And if you try to take this approach, and I have seen this many times and with many students, so I would definitely like to draw your attention that take an event-centric approach, break down the lifespan into various questions, prepare a list of significators, and then, like they say, one step at a time or one question at a time. So this is how then you do a horoscope reading according to the Krishnamurti Paddhati. So now let me recap the 3 essential tips or the guidelines that I just discussed with you. So during the initial phase of making a move from the Parashari to the KP method, always remember these 3 rules that I just mentioned over here. They will be very helpful. The rule number 1, the intentional unlearning of the Parashari or the traditional rules. Then the point number 2 was the Bhava Yuti through significator. This is the central engine of KP. This is going to help you in analyzing a chart. And then you have to take a event-centric approach. If you stick to these 3 rules during the initial phases of your transitioning from Parashari to Krishnamurti Paddhati, you will be definitely on a very fast track. You will have no confusion and you will be able to learn the KP rules very easily. Because KP is simple, it's not difficult. The only thing is that keep these 3 guidelines in mind. And last but not the least, the time you had spent learning and practicing the Parashari Jyotish will not go waste. I can assure you that. At one point in KP, your Parashari astrology experience will start paying you off. That's all in this video. Thanks for watching.